get started. Well, welcome back, everybody. I'm Pastor Josh here at First Congregational Church, and this is
Katie Johnson, also from First Congregational Church, the Children's Discipleship Director.
And we are here bringing you the podcast Along the Road, where we're intersecting faith and life. And last week and this week, we're doing a little virtually here, but I believe we'll be back in person together at the table next week. So we look forward to that as well. We've been talking a lot about books last week and this week and the next week. We talk about these things as well. But last week we talked about our fiction books. I don't know if anyone had a chance to think about their fiction books or their favorites, and we had some thoughts and ideas about that. And this week we're going to enter the very large world of non-fiction books.
That's right, because in the library, the nonfiction section is larger than the fiction section.
It is. And so, it's going to be, I think we're going to have to narrow our thoughts. And we wrote some questions down as we thought about this, and we can just kind of start with that. The first thing, and I think it's a good question a lot of people ask, because nonfiction books, for some people, they don't want to turn to them. It's hard. It's like you're back in school and those types of things. So why, in your opinion, and I have an opinion, but why, in your opinion, is it helpful to enter the nonfiction world?
Well, I believe in being a lifelong learner. And fiction books are great because they're a break and they're fun or distracting, but I don't know everything, and I'm not even close to knowing everything, and I don't need to know everything. However, there are things that I do need to know. And so that's where nonfiction books come in. And it just, it helps you be a more rounded person. You're a more interesting person to talk to if you know about other subjects.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that. A lifelong learner, I guess in the Christian world, we call that a disciple. Usually we're forming that to a disciple of Christ, but a disciple is a lifelong learner. And as a Christian, you're learning the life of Christ and who he is. But this is also the world he created. And I see it in the same vein, but as discovering more of God's general truth. God's general truth is out there for the world to see. You don't have to be a believer to know that gravity is air. God created that, and we discover that. We talk about that.
Sure.
And nonfiction books can really take us in many different directions in that world. Well-rounded, I think that's a good way to put it. You can be better in your social relationships at work, with your neighbors, if you just have a little bit of understanding of these things. I don't have to be an expert, in the sciences, but have an understanding of the different viewpoints. That is one of the helps for sure that we can definitely look at. So before we get to our books, let's just look at some of these. I have different reasons as well, but how do you choose the nonfiction books you're going for? And I know it's a broad world, so maybe you choose a category first. I don't know. What do you do first?
Well, I think it depends on the situation for me. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I'm looking for ones because I need them for work. I need to know more about children or about mental health in children, or I'm looking for different ways to teach them, or I'm looking for ideas on how to connect with parents, that kind of thing. So that would be work related. But sometimes I will be talking with someone and a subject will come up and I'll think, oh, that's interesting. Yeah. Or they'll suggest a book. I would be interested in reading that, or at least, getting it from the library and seeing what it's all about. I'm a firm believer in the library because books are expensive. And especially if you are not sure if it's a topic you're interested in, or a book that you can connect with, that resonates with you, you don't want to buy it. But with the resource of a library, you have that opportunity to have access to it. And then sometimes I stumble on books by accident and really like them. And one of the books on my list is that. but I'll save that for later.
Oh, okay, very good. I think I can agree with most of that, and understanding, all of our worlds are different. So usually a first nonfiction book might be something that is connected to what we do, where we are. The technicality of, like, for me, of leadership of groups, of systems, those types of
Sure.
things. And usually in things maybe I'm not as well versed in. Of course, there's a lot of nonfiction when you're studying for sermon, but I purposely took most of that out of this discussion, because that would be almost like, well, work is telling you to read this. And
Right.
so it's a
Yes,
little different. So it's more,
it is. Sure.
and yeah, and so it leads, both of those lead to kind of like the last question: how do we grapple with different viewpoints? Because the ones I'm going to share are not by Christian authors. Two of them are not. One of them is. And so they'll have viewpoints that don't adhere to the idea that there's a creator. And maybe they'll discuss really good information and then base it off of evolution, or they just also have ideas or thoughts on how to work through problems that are not according to Scripture.
Yep.
And so, how do you grapple with that when you're reading? And then I think that's kind of where we'll kind of get our launching point. I'll tell you how I do it after you do, and give us our passage for the day, and we'll look at that.
Right. Well, I do think there is a great deal of value in understanding where the other side is coming from.
Yeah, absolutely.
What motivates them, and how they're looking
Mm-hmm.
at things, because then it gives you information on how to respond, I think.
Right.
And there's also general truth.
Yeah.
Truth that is not based in Scripture, but it's still, truth is from God, whether it has to do directly with Him or not. And so
Right.
there's value in that too.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's definitely something we have to be aware of. And it's something that I think, when I was young, my mom did this a lot, interacting with everything. She included media, the commercials on TV and all that stuff, but interacting our biblical view with everything that's coming in. And that's why I wanted to bring up 2 Corinthians chapter 10. And Paul's talking about the battle that we have in life, where we are battling with walking in the flesh, like with non-biblical lifestyle. And we are waging a war that is not always right in front of us, but it's subtle. It can be a spiritual war. It can be thoughts and ideas coming in our minds. And he said, in verse 5 of chapter 10, we destroy every argument and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God, and take every thought captive to obey Christ, being ready to punish every disobedience when your obedience is complete. And what's interesting about that is it doesn't mean, in order to do that, to destroy every lofty thought that goes against the knowledge of God, you have to be exploring the thoughts out there.
Sure.
And then I see it kind of like the filter, like the Scripture. The more we know Scripture, the more we understand it. That filter is what I'm reading. And I'm reading something, it hits something, because something's not right about that. Oh, that's because God actually says this. So 95% of this, no problem. This 5%, oh, I see God. And so this passage kind of sits in there when I look into these worlds, and especially the way our culture is going now, with such diverse opinions about lifestyle, about how family systems are, and all those types of things. And we want to sit with Scripture and where that is. But still understand people's viewpoint in those things as well.
That's right. And it's a good exercise, because when you're with a book, you can take your time and you can think about it. But when you're in a conversation with someone, you don't have always that kind of luxury. So if you've already done it with a book and thought through the arguments and so forth, then when you're talking with someone, you can feel more confident because you have worked it through already.
Yeah. And you can speak not out of reaction, but out of thoughtfulness. You can speak out of understanding. I've read your viewpoint. I know what you're talking about. You can speak with grace and love and mercy.
That's
which
right.
I think is very important, that we can disagree. We can disagree with people. Maybe someone you're talking to doesn't even hold to Scripture yet. They're not a believer.
Right.
So I can't hold them to that, but until they are under Christ, I can hold them to the fact that I will love them and I will point them to the gospel, and we can disagree lovingly
Yes.
up until that point. And then, of course, believers disagree in certain things as well, and we still keep coming back to speaking to each other with grace and mercy over these things. And so,
Hmm.
approaching the books, I think, is the same way. Some of them are purely to learn a lot about what the other side is thinking and where they come from. And other ones really help us in different ways. So why don't we jump into these books? I'll let you go
Okay.
first, and you can share with me your books. You can do that.
Okay. So the first one so first of all, let me say that nonfiction is not my go-to.
Mhm.
There are people who much prefer nonfiction to fiction. And my husband Chuck is one of them. And that's fine. It's not my go-to. I had to think for a while to pick out three of my favorite nonfiction books.
Okay.
However, one of them I would say is probably my top one. I found through my little free library. It just
Oh,
happened to
nice.
show up there, and that sounds interesting. Let me read
Mhm.
that. It's called The Lost Painting, and the subtitle is The Quest for a Caravaggio Masterpiece. So
Interesting.
Caravaggio was, a very famous painter in Italy, and the book reads like a novel. It's
Yeah.
so interesting
Yeah.
how this I think she was a doctoral art student,
Mm.
and she had to go these different places, and she was doing all this research and
Yeah.
dusty cellars and just really interesting. But they tracked it down,
Wow.
and yeah, very cool, and a fun book, and it's just opens up that whole world. How do you verify a painting as being genuinely by a master? Because if it
Yeah.
is, it's obviously worth an enormous amount of money.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's true.
that was a really interesting book. Yep. So then the other two I read 3 or 4 years, maybe 5 years now, I don't know, ago. And they're related,
Okay.
but although they're not the same. The first one that I read, which was suggested to me by my son, he had read it in college, was called In Defense of Food by Michael
Interesting.
Pollan.
Okay.
Yes. So it's not a terribly thick book. And Pollan's philosophy is eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
Sounds good.
It is. But he talks about, that was my first introduction to GMOs,
Hmm.
genetically modified, and, and why that's a problem and what it can lead to,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
all of that kind of thing. So
Mhm.
that was a very much of an eye opener because I knew nothing about that.
Oh, yeah. It's quite a world. Yeah.
It is quite a world. And I would say that's a very good introduction to it because it's not long
Yeah.
and it's not super technical.
Oh, good.
So it's
Yeah.
accessible that way.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other one I actually happen to have, Animal Vegetable Miracle. It's by Barbara Kingsolver, who usually writes fiction. But
I thought that was a fiction name. Okay. Yeah.
in this case, her family made the decision that they would try and eat local for a whole year, which meant that they couldn't eat strawberries out of season, and
Yeah.
they were eating what was seasonable for the time. And
Yeah.
it's the story of that, and there are a few recipes in it, and she talks about it, how she had two girls who were, I think, maybe one was a teenager and one was a preteen, or that kind of age
Yeah.
frame.
Yeah.
So how they went about this project, and so it's food related as well, but from a little bit different angle.
Yeah.
And
Of course.
how when we rely on things that are coming from around the world, how that impacts
Yeah.
our world in terms of greenhouse effect and all of
course.
those pieces.
Yeah.
And so that one again was read like more of a story than a textbook. But it makes you think, okay, so in the spring, what's fresh is rhubarb and scallions and lettuce,
Yeah.
and then in the summer, obviously, there's a huge wealth, and then you've got the root vegetables in the fall through the winter, and it's always very interesting. So
It is
those
interesting.
are my three choices.
Yeah, that makes me think of my friend Valak from Ukraine describing one of the first times when he was a teenager that he came to the U.S. and he walked into a grocery store, and I think he was in tears because we are very fortunate that we can have apples and oranges all winter long. We can have all types of berries and fruits all the time.
Yes.
And it was quite a shock to his system, from where he came from. There are parts in Ukraine, at least at the time,
Yeah.
in the big cities where you have more variety like that. But once you get outside the big city into smaller towns and villages, and he had a root cellar, so they keep things in their cellar for the season. Like it's just all that very different. Very interesting. I'm interested in those. We do forget how that works and how that can affect us. Very, very interesting. And these are books that, when people maybe talk to you about, oh, I'm interested in local stuff. Well, why don't you read a little bit of this person's story to understand that, or, I keep hearing about, genetically modified foods. Another one, here's a simple book that can help you understand at least the beginning, and you're not telling them they have to do one or the other, but I think it's good for information and for understanding. Yeah. That's very good.
That's right. Yep.
So I have mine over here on a tab, so I'm going to look at this tab over here real quick. I have 3 books, and one of them is a book called Effective Biblical Counseling. And I know it's sort of cheating in the sense that, yes, it sounds like a workbook for work. But it is a book that I've used for myself. I've used for others. I've also used it to teach other people. In Ukraine, when I teach at the Bible college, this is the book I base the course off of. Very, very good book. The principles in it on counseling, I think anybody could use. And it sets a very nice framework on counseling for the layperson. I'm not going to go
ask how technical it was.
It's really not. And actually, if you follow it well, there's some really good pictures that help you understand everything.
Good.
So it helps. And it sets a good framework for counseling and a biblical perspective. Who we are as created by God, how that is, what is broken, what we're trying to repair. It's very good. It's by Larry Crabb. He's a well-known author as well. But I think it's good for, I think families, parents could use it. Anyone can use it because it's simple enough to go, I can use this in everyday life. I can use this with my coworkers if they're having a problem and we just talk through some things. It doesn't make you a therapist. That's a totally different thing. But it helps us care. It helps us care for each other better. So yeah, that's the first book that I have there. The second one is one that I don't have with me, and most of these I don't have with me. I have them on my Kindle, or I just remember them very well. It's by a guy named Charles Duhigg, and Charles Duhigg was, he's like one of those journalists that writes about things, and he wrote a book called The Power of Habit. And The Power of Habit's a phenomenal story about the habits that people have, and how they can completely transform and change. And then, but then he takes it from that into the science of it, how our brains can be learning as they grow. Someone who 10 years ago, was, I think one of the stories is someone's 10 years ago who was overweight and smoking and doing this. And 10 years later, you see them, they're running marathons and they're eating healthy and they're doing this. And what subtle changes, what did they do? What shifted? And how the mind shifts throughout that. So the first part of the book is about this powerful uh, understanding of our own habits, and then it dives into the power of habit in corporate situations, um, which is really interesting, and how these habits can. Like, he shares stories, a lot of these compelling stories to go with it, and then one was a story at a hospital where this big malpractice thing was happening, and then they go back far enough to find that the habits where things fell apart, and created a culture of habit that didn't go well. And so, so it's not just a compelling story, but then the research that helped them fix that problem within the culture.
Yeah, that would be
Um,
interesting.
it's a phenomenal book for anybody working with a group of people, anybody that like for myself entering churches. Like, I came to our church; it's been around for a very long time, and so you think of, there are habits already ingrained. Some are good, some are bad, and the things that I choose to implement, like to our staff, we do things that could have both positive and negative effect. And I don't know what it'll be like. And so am I willing to stop something or change something or move something a year down the road, 2 years down the road? The book really helped with that.
Yep.
It helped even understanding, like when you read scripture, how certain groups of people didn't want to change their tradition. And you can sit there and go, oh yeah, there's a power of habit, and there's a settledness in who you are in your world, because your traditions don't change. But when Christ comes and a covenant is completed, some traditions are going to change, and that's what you're great against. It's a very, very good book, I think,
Sure.
for many people that way. I've referred to it. He's written several. Another one that he wrote was similar to that, and but the power of habit was the one, I think, that pretty much got him on the map for that. And very, very good book. The third book is it's a little different, because I try to pick ones that were all from different categories of life. And I like you, I gravitate towards fictional books. I read a lot of commentaries and different things for
Sure.
work. So a fictional book is good. And also, as I said, even fictional books are good because I learn more about story and storytelling and depth story, which helps the preaching as well. But I do like fictional books. So this next one is interesting because I'm someone who's slightly interested in history, World War II history, and other history. And there's this book called A Higher Call, and it's a true story. The title is An Incredible True Story of Combat and Chivalry in the War-Torn Skies of World War II. And it's a story of two different pilots. One is an American pilot flying a bomber plane, and the other one is a Luftwaffe pilot in German skies. And their backgrounds, their stories, how they got into it. Really interesting to me how some of the German pilots were almost forced into what they had, and the story on the German pilot's very interesting, and it's written kind of like the book you shared. It's written a lot like a novel. It's also a true story, and you can find YouTube video interviews with both of these guys. So there's
it's
a lot.
Recent enough. Yeah.
It's recent enough, and before they passed away, I think they've since passed. Before they passed away, they were to do this. But what drove the story is the American pilot did a bombing run and was on his way back and flying back towards the coastline of France to go back to Britain, and this Luftwaffe pilot came up behind him. The bomber plane was completely riddled, holes all over it, tail parts missing, and escorted him into safe waters and let him fly away. And they made eye contact and stayed around. It's a phenomenal story.
Wow.
And then many years down the road, they've actually met, and they would meet so often and talk about that. But it's that history behind everything that brought that moment together. Quite a story. Quite a story.
I bet.
And then you can kind of dive into, because there's historical websites that talk about the story, and there are similar ones like this, but a higher call, it's written by Adam Makos, I think is how you say him, or Makos, how you say his name. It's it's nonfiction, written not in fiction style, but just written in as a story because it is. It's different than sometimes we will read books that are historical fiction, which take pieces of history and then they add a fiction story to kind of go around it. And a lot of even popular Netflix shows right now are like that. Like, here's the queen, and we know certain things, but we're going to add in all our own fictional dialogue and fictional things that we think happened. But this is not like that. This is a lot of painstaking research, to go off of this and where this is. And I think even the author talks about, I think it took him over 10 years to gather all this information and meet people and verify things and go through. Like, there's just, it's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting. So I think those books are ones that always kind of pop up in my head when we talk about nonfiction, for sure, and can move forward with that. And so those are the ones that I would share. But I think if we kind of round it off, I always come back to that 2 Corinthians chapter 10 portion, reading people's stories, like the two pilots, or like Charles Duhigg in The Power of Habit. Not all of what they do and all of what they say is biblical. Not all of what they do and all what they ask you to do is biblical. And so I must, with everything I'm reading, and even commentaries, because commentaries can come from wide varieties of viewpoints, I must rely that I know God's word and can filter it that way. And so that's kind of my encouragement to, well, I know to you, but to anybody listening, that as you're reading fiction, nonfiction, next week when we talk about self-help books, you have the better understanding you have of God's word, the better you can glean the general truth from what's out there. I think that would be my word of wisdom, I guess, to send out that way.
Great.
Yeah. And so I think with that, we'll leave. And next week, we'll do self-help books. And then we have a couple more weeks, and we're going to go through the end of June, and we'll take a 2-month break in July and August, and we'll come back for season 2 at the beginning of September. But I hope you all have a good week. And remember, you can leave us a comment, you can like, and we'll list all the books in the description below. So have a wonderful day.
Yeah. And tell us about any of your favorite nonfiction books too.
Yes, we would love to hear that for sure. So have a great day.